Now, from Austin, Texas, Politics with the Big Dogs, and your host, Anthony Holm.
Hello, hello, hello. This is Anthony Holm, host of Politics with the Big Dogs, and we have a big dog with us today. We have Lubbock City Councilman, constitutional conservative, Marine, not a former Marine, once a Marine, always a Marine, David Glasheen. And as we approach Veterans Day, I'm honored to have a veteran with us. David, thank you for joining us. How are you doing in Lubbock today?
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be on the show.
Tell us about Lubbock. What's going on?
Well, Anthony, like you said, Lubbock is a conservative community, and one of the things I enjoy about serving on the city council is that we have a relatively conservative city council. Of course, there are always projects and ways, I think, for us to continue to deliver on conservative goals, especially at the municipal and county levels.
Well, tell us some. I mean, I'm going to bring up an instance or two about you. I remember there were some, and folks, for our listeners, I used to work quite a bit in Lubbock. I think many of you know that. And I remember an art walk issue, but we're gonna table that for now. So how are you making the lives of your citizenry better off through conservative values?
I'll give you a recent example. Lubbock recently abolished roadway impact fees. I'll take a second to explain what those are.
Please.
Impact fees are a tax that the city applies to new construction. So, for example, if you build a home, a single family home, it could add several $1,000s to the cost of that new home, and that in the form of an impact fee that has to be paid when you're getting your certificate of occupancy to move into the home. And so this fee is used to pay for roads, water infrastructure in other parts of the city. So it doesn't go to pay, for example, for the street in front of your home. The developer paid for that. It doesn't go to pay for the major street that's adjacent to your home, because that's already been paid for by the city in some way or fashion. These impact fees are supposed to go into a savings account that could then be used for other projects.
A big tax collection scheme, so it sounds like to me. But I want to make sure I understand and our listeners. So if there's an existing road, there's a bunch of houses on it, and I, Anthony, decide to build a house on that road, I'm going to pay a bunch of these fees, in theory, for a road and water that I've already paid to hook up and a road that already exists. Is that an accurate statement?
That's exactly right. And it's even more offensive if you think about it, because imagine that the road has been there for 50 years and you just have a vacant lot that's just now getting built on. You still have to pay the impact fee to the city for building on your lot.
Look, I know this is a small thing, and folks might not be that interested in city impact fees, but it's not lost on me on its fundamental nature that we've got a vacant lot, we, the city and the county, and we're getting a small amount of tax on that. And in an ideal world, somebody builds a big, beautiful 4-bedroom home and their children start living there. And then we get a whole bunch more taxes on it because the value is increased by the investment in this family. Yet we're going to disincentivize that act and make it more expensive by laying on, right? Like, talk about misaligned values, but let's cover
bad on single family homes, but at least there you can incorporate it into a mortgage and some of the purchase cost of a home. It has an even worse effect on commercial development, because the cost of a roadway impact fee for a commercial project could be as much as the whole first year of rent for a new business. And so you were doubling the startup costs of a new business. And we in Lubbock as a community, we thrive on small business. We want new businesses to grow and develop. And so when I was looking at the roadway impact fees and how they were affecting businesses, I met with a guy who owned a gym here in town, and he had a really successful location. He was happy with how the gym was growing. So he was ready to open a second location. But in the meantime, the city had passed roadway impact fees. And so he couldn't replicate his business model that had been so successful because of the huge startup cost that comes from the roadway impact fees. So
that's ridiculous.
Oh, it's terrible. It's like, from the city's perspective too, if all you cared about was collecting tax revenue, it's like killing the golden goose, the goose that lays the golden eggs, because you're trying to get a few $100,000s of impact fees on the front end at the cost of all the sales tax and property tax revenue that the city would collect over the lifetime of a business.
Yeah.
So
or that
you're
property
shutting down a
40
business.
years.
Yeah, you're preventing new jobs from being in the community, and you're losing out on the revenue source that actually pays for things like police and fire service and all those public safety essentials that roadway impact fees can't be used for.
Every time we have somebody like you on the show, we learn more and more about just the boneheaded moves of government and how they tax us even more than we think without calling it a tax. So, folks, if you're just joining us, this is Anthony Holm, host of Politics with the Big Dogs. We have a big dog, David Glasheen, a city council member in Lubbock, a staunch constitutional conservative, a Marine, a family man. And we're going to get into that more, but he was giving us a perspective of the moment on the city of Lubbock and one of the more interesting things that have happened, or they were stifling job creation and construction. So what else is happening at the city? Is that our big action of the quarter?
That's a big recent item. Yeah. And so for your listeners, if they're interested in how things like this happen, most of your average city council members don't show up and think, I'm going to think of a new esoteric tax to pass on to people that's hidden, from public view. The way that these things spread from city to city is usually outside consultants come in. They get paid by the city council to come up with ideas to help cover the cost of new development, which really, in fact, pays for itself. And then these consultants, after they charge a city, $100,000 on for these ideas, help them implement these ideas on a continuing basis. So if you want to stay engaged in your local politics, be on the lookout for outside consultants.
Look, having been an outside consultant in portions of my life, I echo that statement, though I was doing other work. But that touches on something we talked about here on the show, which is taxpayer-funded lobbying. And for our listeners who've caught that episode with James Quintero, you'll remember, and those who haven't, David, you're acutely aware of it. And this is a long time process why local governments, counties and cities and hospital districts and others use your tax dollars at the local level, and they hire outside quote unquote consultants and or lobbyists, call them what they are, to lobby legislature to give their local governments either more tax monies or the right to collect more tax monies and pay them more. Like you followed this fight. What are your thoughts on it?
Oh, absolutely. One of the reasons I voted against the last city council budget was because it included over $100,000 in fees for taxpayer-funded lobbying, both at the state and federal level. And I think you really described the issue with taxpayer-funded lobbying well, that we are taking citizens' tax dollars and then using it to advocate against the interests of citizens. Our citizens elect leaders to state and federal office to follow the will of the people, and it's morally wrong for local governments to take money from their citizens to work against the citizens' interests and advocate against the citizens' desires.
So you voted against the budget as a result of it. That's awesome. Were you the lone wolf voting against it?
No, the mayor, Mayor Mark McBrayer, and I both voted against it as it was a tax increase and some of these program issues as well.
Did it pass nonetheless?
It did.
You guys are awesome. There's no way around it. And listen, the irony, you just happen to be on the Lubbock City Council. So we could have made the same claim about virtually almost any city in Texas, to include little tiny ones with 15,000. But the fact that it happens to be Lubbock that we're talking about, where the Speaker of the Texas House, perhaps the most powerful political elected official in the legislature, is from Lubbock, Dustin Burrows, like, it's nuts if the city of Lubbock thinks it needs to spend $100,000 on an outside lobbyism.
Exactly.
I mean, what?
And that's the thing is, our mayor, our city management, they can pick up the phone and call our elected representatives. We have outstanding representatives at the state and federal Lubbock level in Lubbock, and we're so fortunate to have a strong leader in the legislature, with Speaker Dustin Burrows being from the Lubbock area. So I don't think that any amount of lobbying influence can be better than having the speaker from your hometown.
No, I couldn't agree more, particularly on one of the smaller hometowns. Like, that's irony. Also, for our listeners, I'm going to point out the grace that David just showed. So David had been a candidate for state representative on an open seat in Lubbock some years ago, and there was as I recall, a four-way primary. He ended up in the runoff, or he didn't win, but he just gave an awful lot of grace to Carl Tepper, who did win. So kudos, and we can all learn from that. In fact,
Well, he's been doing a good job too, to give him credit. He's really represented the conservative values of our community well in the legislature.
that's very kind of you. Well, I've got to poke him a little bit because I got into it, and many of our listeners know, with Jeff Leach over this trucking bill. And the trucking bill, the part that I really had issues with it. Currently, as our listeners know, if a drunk semi-truck driver crashes into your wife and kills her or hurts your family, if they can't read or write English, the jury instantly finds out. Like, it's not up for debate. We said in Texas, our values are such that if you got a guy who doesn't know the language, who's driving a 70,000-pound missile, then the jury's going to know. So Republican Jeff Leach, who happens to be a defense lawyer from Plano area, he carried a bill for a big tort reform group that said, no, the jury's not going to find out. They're not going to learn that. We're going to change the law. And a bunch of Republicans signed on for it. Many, frankly, I don't think they knew what was in it. But to speed things ahead, I was an advocate against it and got in a big public fight with Mr. Leach, and then ran a commercial in his district that was honest and called it what it was. He, being Mr. Leach, denounced it, and then a online news organization did a truth test, and they broke it down line by line, and of course said it's 100%, and I think they rated it as very true. But the part that I'm leading to is they then said, how did this type of bill come into play when we have a majority Republican Texas House and all these guys are concerned? What are they doing defending foreign truckers? Well, they did an analysis of Texans for Lawsuit Reform's donor base, and they said, oh, look at that. All these co-authors got incredible amounts of money from Texans for Laws. That's why this thing almost passed. Well, Mr. Tepper was in an elite club. He got over $1 million from Texans for Lawsuit Reform, who are the biggest lobby group in Texas, and they primarily fund Republicans, but they've also done many millions of dollars to liberal Democrats over the years. And Mr. Tepper has gotten $1 million from them. I think, in fact, to use against you, David, not to open a wound. I didn't intend at all to take it there. Frankly, you were so graceful to him, and then he did make the $1 million club on one bad vote, at least, or one really bad bill. If he said no, let's defend foreign truckers, I doubt he knew what was in it. I think he was just doing what TLR asked. But
well, you know what I think what stands out about that is, as conservatives, we believe that the government should not pick winners and losers in any industry. We really believe in personal accountability, and you succeed or you fail on your own effort. And so that's why I think it goes against our fundamental conservative values to have the government come in and try to tip the scales in favor of foreign trucking companies or insurance companies that want to charge higher premiums. We need to let the truth work itself out in the jury process, like it has for hundreds of years in this country.
Yeah, no question. And look, and in truth, I think they're really just anymore an insurance front group, right? The insurance companies in Texas made record profits across America, yet our rates keep going up, and these guys and others just keep trying to protect them in the legislature. But look, I want to focus a little bit more on you, and as we're advancing into Veterans Day, and I want to honor your service, because you in particular took an interesting path. Many people have served. I did not. All of my family did. My father, career, my grandfathers, that was our way out in Iowa. We were kind of poor farmers. Your world was a little different. And your father was a very successful attorney, and you had a lot of opportunity in life. And one of the things that I honor most about you is after you got out of law school, you went to undergrad and then law school. And tell us where you went.
I went to law school in the University of Houston.
And undergrad?
An undergrad, Texas A&M.
Texas A&M, fighting Aggies. So he gets out and he doesn't join his dad's law firm, or he doesn't. There's so many other things he could have done. What'd you do?
Well, in college, I took an unusual route. Like you said, in college, I enlisted in the Army Reserve. I really wanted to serve in the military, and I knew from friends and family that had served in the military that the best officers were ones who'd been enlisted before. So I joined the Army, and I did that in the reserve until I became a sergeant in the Army Reserve. And In law school, I had the opportunity to move to an active duty contract since I commissioned as an officer in the United States Marine Corps and went on to active duty after I finished law school.
Look, that's the ultimate Boy Scout and a literal Boy Scout, Eagle Scout, as I recall. So I really appreciate that about you. I think if I had those opportunities, I would have walked a different path. So I bow down, and as we consider the veterans and those who have done great service to our nation, thank you, and thank you.
Well, thank you. It was an immense privilege, and the military does so much to invest in the people who serve. I feel like I got everything that I put into it as well.
Well, and I just happened to have an opportunity over the some years ago to witness you do some distance shooting, and they trained you up. It's impressive. All right. One of my favorite things, if you're okay with it, I like to talk about the whole brouhaha, because I was in and out of Lubbock quite a bit at the time over, I think it's called Art Walk. Is that it?
First Friday Art Trail is what it's called.
Well, can you tell us the backstory, please? Well, if you're just joining, this is a staunch conservative from Lubbock, David Glasheen, a Marine, an attorney, a member of the city council there, who voted against the budget because it had a $100,000 carve out for taxpayer funded lobbying. It was a tax increase, and he's now about to give us some insight into one of the first forays of public life for him in Lubbock.
Well, this was right after I joined the Lubbock City Council as all this started off. So a little bit of background. The First Friday Art Trail is kind of a local downtown tradition where on the first Friday of every month, businesses and art galleries will open up and people kind of walk around between the different locations and enjoy the different galleries. Well, at one point, the city of Lubbock decided to start giving a grant to the organization that runs the First Friday Art Trail. And this grant came from hotel occupancy tax dollars that are collected from when you rent a hotel, for example. Well, in the June First Friday Art Trail, the organization used these public tax dollars to advertise and bring people to galleries that featured drag performers and featured political election campaigning. And so you had a very inappropriate use of tax dollars there, not only with drag performances in front of children, but also using tax dollars to help support political campaigns. And I think this is a great example of how much wasteful government spending there is. This was just one item on an agenda full of kind of relatively routine budget items, but it was after digging into each particular line item, I found out the background on what was happening with these events and how they were supported by, they're using tax dollars to support drag shows in front of families. And so fortunately, I brought this to the attention of the council, and the rest of the council agreed with me that it was a program they needed to stop. But what came after is just as interesting, because there was an immense backlash from the art community that supported these drag shows for kids. They wanted to have, city buses pay for voter registration for a liberal political campaign, and they packed City Hall to come and demand their money back. And they acted like it was a tremendous outrage that the city was not giving them money to do their drag shows. And when you have 100 people in City Hall, it feels like a crowd, let me tell you. So at the end of the day, some of the other members of the council agreed to give them a portion of their funding back. But we were able to work with the organization to change the grant guidelines to make sure that money is not going to be used like these for these sorts of programs in the future.
So look, folks, he's one of us. And if any of us had landed on city council and really dug in our own cities, we'd probably find something similar. But he had the courage to stand up and do it. And you have shown the courage throughout. So you said that was June. Are your city elections in May?
They are.
So you have like 3 or 4 weeks on the council, and you're like, hey, the taxpayer is funding private schools for little kids, and boom, and then it just exploded. It was in the news, and people were showing. I remember just panic, and we led saying, oh, Lubbock, it's this conservative bastion, much like the Texas legislature, all conservative, but they do a lot of funky stuff in the ledge, and clearly in the city of Lubbock too. But a guy like you in 4 weeks just scratch stop on the brakes. I didn't do a very good brake screeching to stop a drag show on a walk that children are are experiencing and viewing and funded by taxpayer dollars. So kudos to you. And I fear that that's a bit of a tender spot, because I remember on the outrage in the community. But
well, I would say that, if you have a few hundred people who are outraged and sending emails every day and making phone calls, it feels like a crowd. But then I'd go to the grocery store and, if I saw my elementary school teacher or somebody who sits next to us in church, they would come up and they would grab my arm and say, David, I'm so happy about what you did for the community. So there's a silent majority that supports common sense decisions on things. And the other thing I'll say for your listeners is that anybody can go and get this information about what your city, your county is doing, and it's all available through open records. And so you can be the voice, you can be the advocate in your own community too.
Oh, that's a great point. We're trying to motivate action here, and you can go to politicsforthebigdogs.com and sign up. We have a number of different pledges or petitions that you can join, and you can also get on our mailing list. You said your teacher and others in the grocery. It is worth knowing that you grew up in Lubbock. You're a lifelong Lubbock guy, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you were really involved in helping make Lubbock a pro-life city. Is that the right nomenclature?
Yeah, if you remember back before Roe versus Wade was overturned, even before Texas led the way with the heartbeat bill, Lubbock passed a bill to make Lubbock a sanctuary city for the unborn. And I think it was a really important step in the pro-life movement to have a government step forward and say, we are going to recognize the sanctity of life, even when incorrect federal court opinions don't. And I think that helped build some momentum for Texas to lead the way in the legislature, and then ultimately to reverse Roe versus Wade at the Supreme Court.
Absolutely. And at the time, Dustin wasn't speaker, but he is now. It didn't lost on me that he was involved in that fight as well. So, folks, when we build from the grassroots up and then people end up in office or in positions of power, those are foundational events on which they rely. Like, what was that organization? Remind me, y'all had a name for it. What was
There were a couple different organizations. One group in particular is called Project Destiny. It's still active here in Lubbock.
Yeah, that's what I had in my head, Project Destiny. And all of you are members and active, and David was out there block walking with his family. Can we talk a little bit about panhandle politics beyond Lubbock? And
Sure.
I don't want to put you on the spot, but what are your thoughts there? Because we've had a few speakers from the panhandle, and we've got some good, powerful members. I don't know if you're familiar with Brandon Creighton, the new, just days ago, maybe a couple of weeks ago, Chancellor of Texas Tech. He's been a longtime friend of mine, an associate and a state rep, and a very effective senator. So talk to us a little bit about panhandle politics, spreading it out.
Well, I think our new chancellor is a great way to start. Texas Tech flagship campus is here in Lubbock, and Tech is the heart of our community in Lubbock. It provides tremendous opportunity to families in West Texas, kids who couldn't afford to go to Austin or further away, for example, can go to a local university here. And Tech has grown and become a tremendous institution, becoming a tier 1 research institution. It creates tremendous educational outcomes for people, and it's also vitally important for our community. So we're all pulling for Texas Tech. Really excited that we have Senator Creighton coming to lead the Texas Tech system, because that is a man who understands education, and he has the right values to implement for education policy.
He sure does. Look, this guy, I didn't understand how effective the bills were and impactful on higher ed. So I've been very close to Creighton for a couple decades. And in fact, he was going to be a guest on the show. And then all of the chancellor events started happening. We kept having to reschedule and move it. At some point, we'll probably get him on. But the reason I reached out to him, I said, Brandon, I didn't realize the scope and the impact of the legislation that you passed or led, the legislature passed and the governor signed to reform the wokeism in higher ed. It was incredible. And the more I got exposed to it and the deeper I learned about it, and I'm pretty close with many of the regents across Texas and some of the presidents, the chancellors of other universities, they kept speaking about Bill X or Bill Y. There were 2 or 3 or 4 of them that were packages, and they were all Brandon's. And I'm like, wow, they had that big of an impact. Wow. So you nailed it intellectually. This guy and philosophically is just a powerhouse. I hate to lose him in the Senate.
But tech will benefit from it. And I think in turn, the state, as we have a conservative leader at the helm of one of our most important educational institutions. But like you said, his bills are so effective because they're not performative. They were getting in the weeds and making real policy changes on, for example, how faculty senates can influence personnel decisions at universities, the tenure requirements, the things that really matter to the academics, and leveling the playing field for intellectual freedom of expression and thought.
I mean, it's just incredible. I had no idea how. I saw the outcomes of higher education, and I experienced it. At UT Law, it was brutal. They just brutalized conservatives and isolated us and really tried to impair our success, not just in the university, but beyond it. There was zero doubt in my mind in the early 2000s that was happening. But until I was more informed, and in part by these bills, did I come to understand what you just spoke to, like the faculty senate and all these little subgroups that suppress individual thought and fundamental freedoms. Mm-hmm. And then now Texas Tech, it's based in Lubbock, but doesn't it have campuses throughout?
So in El Paso, Amarillo, San Angelo, it's really a West Texas institution. So Tech has recently opened a dental school in El Paso, opened a new veterinary school in Amarillo. And there's so much demand for higher education in our state that we've got to balance our investments beyond just the kind of the traditional dominance that UT and A&M have enjoyed with access to the permanent university fund, for example.
Yeah, and I had the misfortune of slicing open my hand when I was in Lubbock a few years ago, and I got to say, I went to Texas Tech University Healthcare. They got me in and out of the ER. It was so efficient, was so reasonably priced, and took maybe 40 minutes. Hallelujah. You guys are blessed with that medical center. Really blessed. What do you see on the horizon over the next 12 to 24 months on the political horizon, both in Lubbock, Panhandle area, and also in Texas?
Well, staying on the topic of Texas Tech, I hope that the legislature will continue to support the Texas Tech University system. We've talked about how important it is for us in West Texas, but Tech also is a relatively conservative academic institution that produces relatively conservative students and graduates from the system. And so if we think about higher education as a tool of developing the next generation of people and how they're going to participate in our social, economic, political landscape, Texas Tech is the sort of organization that we want to support.
That's a really excellent point, and it triggers one of the viral events that I saw, and I don't see very many viral events. After the Charlie Kirk assassination, there was, I think, really inappropriate conduct from a number of students at Texas Tech and across America. I don't want to isolate Tech, but they dropped the hammer pretty quick. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh, absolutely. There was
a
woman who was mocking the death of Charlie Kirk to some people who had gathered in support of him, and she was expelled, I think, the same week and kicked out of the university system. And the message is simple: that we don't tolerate people who actively support and condone violence and political violence. That's exactly what we should expect from our universities, whereas we see the most so-called elite institutions in the country, they have professors and students who are glorifying political violence and the death of ordinary conservative leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't remember if it was a prayer vigil or not that she was disrupting and chanting and mocking, but that certainly happened across America. And the contrast is right and appropriate that you just flagged. Brown and Harvard and all of these East Coast that were out there actively supporting Hamas. They're doing it under the guise of the Palestinian state, but that's controlled by Hamas, a terrorist organization, recognized as a terrorist organization across the world by many, many nations, certainly the U.S. They run the government of Palestine. They are the elected government. The people elected a terrorist state. And we had up and down the East Coast, thousands and tens of thousands led by these activist professors and elsewhere chanting, death to Israel and free Palestine, free Hamas. That stands in an awfully stark contrast to what Texas Tech did with Charlie Kirk, right? Like, God bless the Raiders. And my poor horns, I went to UT undergrad and law school, and when it comes to football, boy, Tech has really had
It's been a rough year for y'all.
Ooh, and you guys, the contrast is just brutal. Okay, what do you see happening in the legislative session next term?
One of the things that I follow most closely is property tax reform, because I believe very strongly that you should own your own home, and property tax puts you in the position of renting your home from the government. We've made tremendous strides on property tax reform, and I know it's been a top priority for conservative leaders in the legislature, but I still think that there's room to improve the property tax system. And I'll be the first to say I don't have the perfect answer to it, but I can give some examples of how it's been successful and how some recent reforms have been, I think, less successful and deserve to be examined closer. One trend that I think is less effective is increasing the use of exemptions or carve-outs for particular groups. For example, saying that a particular business type does not need to pay as much property tax as another business type. That doesn't really help level the playing field for all businesses or all homeowners. And we've also seen an impact on the city budget, for example, where our projected property tax growth was much less than expected because the implementation of so many exemptions that protected particular special interests rather than reducing a property tax burden for everybody. So there are a couple of ways that I think could still be successful for the legislature to look at. I'm encouraged with the trend of making it more difficult for cities to pass property tax increases and counties to pass property tax increases.
Hallelujah.
I think if you talk to an average citizen, that's going to be one of the number one issues that they have. Even renters understand that property taxes directly increase their cost of housing because all those costs are passed on. So it's a huge affordability issue for everybody. But despite all of our efforts to elect local leaders who promise to reduce property taxes, we still face property tax increases year after year. So I hope the legislator will continue to tighten the leash on that.
You're so kind. Again, that West Texas grace you led with, we've made tremendous strides. I'm just going to say they have failed us top to bottom. I have a different opinion on it. It doesn't mean either one of us are right. I think it's the number one issue in Texas among conservatives, period. We're losing our homes. I'm considering selling my home. It's outrageous, the amount. I have an older home. It's nice, but it's older. And nonetheless, I shouldn't be paying. How many families can afford $20,000 a year in property taxes? And it just goes up. Yet our budget grew by $20 billion. Right. And it was funny. A whole bunch of elected officials in the legislature started coming out at the end of session, toward the end of session. You saw these tweets. We reduced property taxes by $50 billion, 50 billion. And all of us were like, that's ridiculous. That's not true. And what they tried to say was over the last.
See our bill going up.
Yeah, of course, right? It was really, really conspicuous. Well, then we end up in a special session, and Governor Abbott, he's the only one who controls the topics for special sessions, as most of our listeners probably know. And he said, property tax relief. Well, guys, if you had dropped it 50 billion, the governor wouldn't be putting it on, right? It was just, I was a little bit embarrassed for him. But no, I think that's the single biggest space where the Republican-led legislature has failed us. I don't know that they're going to be able to fix it. They don't seem to have the Constitution. When we had a massive budget surplus, and in the years ahead we may not. But that is where people will rise up, and I do think we'll have a Newt Gingrich style sweep in Texas on that issue, because it's just too impactful to even a renter, as you said. And I'm going to advance a theory that I think I'm the only one in the party advancing. I have actually, to some extent, lamented the massive demise of Democrats in Texas. Not that I want them to hold any offices. They're radical and nuts. But if they were just a little bit more mainstream and had a little bit more opportunity, some hope on their side, they could at least help us, people like you and I who are lobbying and advocating our leaders for property. They could stand up and say, hey, these Republicans over the last 25 years haven't reduced your property taxes. Elect us and we will. Not that we would elect them, right? But that would really help energize some outcomes, I think, because frankly, for 30 years, we've kind of gotten soft, we being Republican Party and conservatives in Texas. We've here and there, we've passed some things, and it got a lot better this last session. But, even the portability of school funding, call it vouchers, call it anything you want, we're like 30 other states ahead of us. And we say, oh, we did the biggest ones, $1 billion. Yeah, it's 2% of the kids. And it's a one-time line item. We're going to have to go fight for it every time. It's not baked in. And we gave, for that $1 billion of portability, we gave the educrats like $7 billion. I mean, it's just a monstrous trade. What do you think about that? I have this working theory. If we can't get it done internally, maybe the Democrats go from like 38 to 43% just to have a louder voice on property taxes.
I think a previous generation of Democrats could have run on that. But like you said, the Democrats today are so focused on identity politics and the culture of victimhood that I don't think they can even start thinking about real policies. What I think is probably the successful future for reducing property taxes is to tackle it at the local level, because your big property tax spenders are the city, the county, and your school districts.
Yep.
And so if you can't fix it at the state, that is one solution is to go and elect a slate of conservatives at a local level who'll be fiscally disciplined and try to balance property tax spending that way. I mean, like, do you follow the Prop Q, for example, in Austin?
I do. An acquaintance of mine, Adam Lowe, is really involved in that and thinks he's going to win it. I bet they do. Tell us about it.
Well, you might know it better than I do, but as I understand it, the Austin City Council is proposing essentially 20%, or is it more?
I don't know the percentage, and thank God I live outside of the city of Austin, just barely, but I do.
I think it's at least a 20% increase in property taxes that's going to be used to for homeless programs, and Austin has its own sordid history with homelessness and homeless spending. But if you look at who the major advocates for this proposition are, it's the homeless special interest groups that are going to be getting the tax dollars from the city to spend on their own programs.
I had heard that, and I think Attorney General Ken Paxton started an investigation of that. Like, there might even have been nonprofits who were illegally or presumably illegally doing electioneering to that end. So if you're just joining us, we're wrapping up an interview with constitutional conservative David Glasheen out of Lubbock, a city councilman, an activist, a Marine, a father, one on the way, and just a great human and great Texan. Prop Q, you think that's the way, huh? We ought to start up a bunch of local efforts to combat property taxes?
I think so. I mean, I think the state is great because it can implement a blanket solution, but I also do strongly believe in local control. And if we as voters, we have a lot more access to our city council, our county commissioners, our local school board. And so those are people that we can sit down with over a cup of coffee and have a conversation with during budget season a little bit easier than we can people at the state level.
I think that's a good point. And also your recognition that the Democrats in Texas, nationally, but certainly in Texas, are so wrapped up on victimhood and identity politics and making sure that, 15-year-old boys get to go to the restroom with our 8-year-old daughters, or some guy who identifies as Sally gets to compete in swim contests with our collegiate women's. It's just so crazy that they can't focus on crime and streets and property taxes. You're right there.
More politics with the big dogs coming up next.
When you're hurt by a semi-truck driver who can't read or speak English, juries have a right to know. That's the law in Texas. But Representative Jeff Leach tried to change the law to protect truck drivers who don't speak English. Leach wants to stop the driver's inability to read or speak our language from automatically going to the jury, going against orders from President Trump and Governor Abbott. Call Representative Leach. Ask him why he's protecting foreign truckers instead of us.
Here's more with Anthony Holm.
And David, you're a veteran, a Marine, and as we approach Veterans Day, what does it mean to you?
Veterans Day is a chance to remember those who have served and are currently serving. So I like to use the time of year to reach out to some of my buddies who are still in the Marine Corps, for example, and say hi and see how they're doing. And it's also a good chance to show gratitude for the people in our community who have served in the armed forces and have moved on to civilian life.
Agreed 100%. And in fact, as you say that, I sit here wondering, we're approaching our 250th anniversary of this incredible republic. And I wonder a few things. And one of them is, I wonder how many Americans served in the military for all the rest of us over the last 250 years. I just can't imagine. But it must be several million.
Oh, I think you're definitely right about that. Several million over time. And you mentioned that also that, the 250th anniversary of our nation coming up next year. This year, we get to celebrate the 250th birthday of the Marine Corps on November 10th. So that's an exciting occasion for us.
Well, what are you and your family going to do on November 10th?
We are going to a Marine Corps ball this year, which will be a lot of fun. It's a great tradition. It kind of combines a lot of the traditional formal pomp and circumstance of the military with a lot of fun and camaraderie. It's a great event.
Are the kids going as well?
Not this year, but I'm excited to take them in the future.
That's incredible. I'm happy for you. Thank you again for your service. I know you're not a former Marine. Once a Marine, always a Marine. As I recall, you're a student of military structures and military history. Am I in error remembering that about you?
Oh, I would describe myself as an armchair general, sure.
Well, as I look around and again, I didn't serve, thank you. But I'd like your opinions on some things. It sure seems to me if we're not in at least a soft war with China, we're there one way or the other. And I read some of the data recently that gave me great pause. And it was effectively this: that the U.S. has the industrial capacity to build about not more than 5 warships a year. In fact, we struggle to do 4. China is cranking out 40, 10x. I believe I saw something recently that we were engaging South Korea for their shipbuilding technology and their capacities. I don't know, but it sure seems to me that current conflicts are headed toward heavy seas, particularly China, Taiwan, South Pacific, and then drone technology. And I believe in the American spirit, but it gives me great pause that we just don't have this heavy industrial capacity for shipbuilding. Am I in error there? What do you think about that? Am I blown?
No, you're completely right. I'll give you a historical example and then I'll apply it to the current day. So if you look at Germany's industrial base prior to World War II versus the combined industrial output of allied nations, I think it's very analogous to the situation of China's industrial base versus the United States and its Pacific allies. The Germans had a technological and quality of equipment advantage in the early days of the war, but that doesn't really matter if you can trade 1 tank for 3 on the battlefield if you can't maintain enough production to meet your rate of attrition. So the same situation applies with the United States and its edge in naval hardware. There's no doubt that we have the best technology. We have the best manned, trained, and equipped Navy in the world, and certainly in the Pacific. But China's strategy in any conflict would be attrition and pay whatever cost it takes to limit our capabilities to create losses for us that we cannot replace. And I think there are a lot of complicated reasons why we've lost our edge in shipbuilding. For example, most of it is done in South Korea and China, like you mentioned, but there's a whole mess of labor relations and Department of Defense contracting and design issues that have made our United States shipbuilding capabilities less competitive.
Just the totality of it gives me such consternation. And we're using warships as an example, but similarly, we could talk about medicine. If I'm going from memory, but I believe 89% of the generic pharmaceuticals that we use as a nation, and I don't know what the percentage is, but it's massive. At least 1/3 of America is dependent on something. I take Armour Thyroid, I have hypothyroid. So every morning, if I didn't have that, I would struggle to be a functioning human. Well, I believe 89% of our generic drugs come from India.
Mm-hmm.
And I just fear that we have put ourselves in a situation of dependency with foreign powers as we start moving into times of disruption. And I bring it up now, not just out of the generic fear, but around Veterans Day. It's, in my mind, it's a disservice to those who have served over the last 250 years. I mean, the best example of the last 2 months is what do they call them? The critical minerals, right? The essential minerals at 80.
The rare earth metals.
Yeah, the rare earth metals. Thank you for getting it, the terminology correct. What, roughly 90% come from China, and they just said, "Oh, you're going to put tariffs on us, so we're going to limit that." Well, that stops everything: our phones, our cars, our computer. So I'd like you to speak to that and your thoughts on it. And then also, you said a moment ago, we're technologically so far ahead of China and anyone else. Yes, but they've been stealing technology really well for 30 years, and they're cutting that gap. So,
Absolutely.
Both of those strains, if you'll take them.
State-sponsored intelligence services and espionage efforts from the Chinese, whether it's human intelligence or hacking, have stolen billions of dollars worth of American intellectual property. And then also the Chinese government forces American companies into technology sharing agreements. So if you want to go manufacture a product in China, you essentially have to give your local Chinese partner the formula for the secret recipe of what you're doing, of the manufacturing process, the technology, the patents that you're using. And so, the short-term advantage to an American firm is that they get cheaper manufacturing. The long-term consequence is we are giving away a technological edge across every industry. And that's what I think makes the America First movement so important. And I think President Trump understands this really well. We have to have agricultural, industrial technology bases in the United States that are capabilities completely self-contained in the United States and staffed by American workers at every level, from the assembly line to the engineering and design suites. You just imagine the consequences if we found ourselves in a global conflict and we didn't have food, that we didn't have fiber to make clothing, cotton, things that we take for granted could really quickly become unavailable in the event of a global conflict that completely restructures trade routes. So I think it's really important that we make sure America has a competitive edge and that we're also helping protect American industries from the unfair competition of outside countries.
And the things that we're just fundamentally dependent on, and it's easy to say everything, but we're not, like, we could do without yogurt. We had to, America.
Yeah, as we have great self-sufficiency in oil and gas production, for example.
Yeah, but the fact that we have it on pharmaceuticals is troubling. And your example with food is the right example, is one I was thinking of, right? If you control the food supply for a nation, you control the nation, period. Arguably, China controls North Korea, because my understanding is the only internet that runs into North Korea is one primary big fiber, and it runs through China. And occasionally they shut it off to modify their behavior. And that's effectively what they've done with the rare earth minerals.
Yeah.
Right? And they're just like, okay, your cars, your batteries, your computers, and nothing's going to work anymore. You can't produce. So fine, we have it all now, but it's much of your attrition analogy that I'm looping back to. Yeah, we have superiority now, but if they're able to build 40 ships a year to our 4, they can lose 3 to our 1, but eventually we're going to lose out because they can lose 40 to our 4. And I just think that we're exposed as a nation, and we've allowed some of our core necessities to be controlled by foreign nations that don't always have our interests in mind.
And that sort of asymmetry also, I think, looking back at the Cold War as an example, creates a greater risk of a conflict that escalates out of control. As if one side knows that an overwhelming conventional warfare favors it. It incentivizes the other nation to employ atomic weapons early on in the early stages of a conflict. So it's it reminds me of the old saying that really the only way to secure peace is to prepare for war. We have to be prepared to win conventional wars as well as any other degree of conflict.
Couldn't agree more, my friend. Let me ask you, are we honoring the folks who have served our republic over the last 250 years by allowing this to occur? Is this perhaps just something every generation faces? Right now it's rare earth minerals, but in the 60s it was something else. And perhaps that is. I mean, I want to be practical, rational about history. In this moment, it fills me with fear for my children, really.
Every generation of Americans have faced their own challenge and their own existential threat. And I really believe at the end of the day, we're the greatest nation on earth, not just because of our government, but because of the spirit of our people. And so I feel very strongly that the American spirit, the American people will always prevail. What upsets me more than the potential threat from the outside is when I see Democrat politicians, senators at the federal level who are using the filibuster to delay passing a budget that would help pay our service members and give them the training and exercise funds that they need to be able to perform their mission. It's not just paying the bills. It's military readiness that the Democrats are withholding from our nation to score political points. So, we'll always be able to defeat the enemies abroad and those who threaten our freedom, but we have to make sure that we're taking care of the people here at home.
Thank you so much for saying that. And I'm a little bit embarrassed that I didn't flag that as well. I mean, look, this government shutdown to try to hyperfund a bankrupt Obamacare is costing our military readiness. It's costing our soldiers their salaries, and primarily Democrats, but a few Republicans quietly, I think, going along with it. They will sacrifice the military, or at least the short-term misery of the military, who are deployed all over the world to try to achieve more of our taxpayer dollars going into a failed Obamacare bankrupt system. That's such a good point. All right. What else? Parting thoughts and otherwise as we go forth and conquer and honor our veterans in the coming days.
Anthony, it was a pleasure to get to talk to you and for all your listeners. I just encourage you from the perspective of somebody who's been on the city council, even one phone call, one email can make a difference and get the ball rolling on improving city politics and city policies. So I encourage you to reach out to your elected representatives and be the advocate for the change that you want to see.
I like that. Thank you. Do you have a website if folks want to learn more about you? City council member?
I think maybe the city of Lubbock website would be on there.
Okay. Well, go to politicswiththebigdogs.com if you want to learn more about David, and I'll make sure to link anybody. You can follow us on Facebook. You can follow us on Twitter. I suspect he too. And thank you for advocating for Lubbock and your community, your conservative values, and the great state of Texas.
Thank you, Anthony. I appreciate your family's service as well.
You're a good man. God bless you, and God bless the United States.
Amen.
Thank you for listening. Join us at politicswiththebigdogs.com. Follow us on X, Instagram. Please join us. Please follow us. Please sign up. Thank you so much for listening. God bless you, and God bless the great state of Texas.
Politics with the Big Dogs with Anthony Holm is supported in part by the First Amendment Alliance Education Fund. Learn more about today's guest and hear other episodes online in our archive. Visit politicswiththebigdogs.com. If you have a question for Anthony Holm, email Anthony at politicswiththebigdogs.com. From deep in the heart of Texas, you've been listening to Politics with the Big Dogs.